Good morning, everyone. Blessed be God. Today we continue our series on pro-life themes during the month of October, and today's theme is on prejudice and racism. And that has to be framed first and foremost in the context of who we are as Catholics and what our Catholic anthropology is, what our understanding of the human person is. That has to be the foundation of any discussion of this. And our Catholic anthropology teaches us that man is not a clever ape or simply a biological organism, that we are created with a divine and spiritual soul, created in God's image and likeness, and made for each one of us to be with God for all eternity. That's our destiny. God created us with that in mind. So each and every human being is in God's image and likeness destined to enter into eternal union with the Lord. That frames everything we say or all of our reflections about any talk about racism or prejudice. There is a lot of talk about that in our time right now. Currently, there are a lot of opinions, there's a lot of strife and a lot of conflict about the issue of racism. Some of it is, I think, distinctly unhelpful. So, for example, to say that everyone of a certain race today is responsible for injustices that took place decades or centuries ago, that itself is an injustice, especially when some of our ancestors weren't even on the continent at that time. So to blame us for what took place centuries ago, that's simply not only a logical fallacy, but it's an injustice. Others take a prominent idea among some people is that one racial group can accuse another whole racial group wholesale of being oppressors and racists. That's racism. But how can we say that a whole group of people, a whole nationality, a whole group of a racial stock is racist simply by ipso facto who they are? Again, those concepts that have become very commonplace in certain circles and political environments, they're very unhelpful, especially for us as Catholics who are trying to understand God's mind about this issue. We all know, America has always been a nation of immigrants, except for the Native Americans who were here long before any immigrants arrived. But then after, many immigrants and have arrived, and we have European Caucasians from all over other parts of the world. We have African Americans, we have Hispanic Americans, we have Caribbeans, we have Asians, we have people from all over. We have ethnicities of many kinds, national origins, probably from everywhere in the world. So to be an American, really, the concept that underlies America, and it was in the mind of the Founding Fathers, is that all of those people would come together and we would be, to use a cliche, a melting pot. That we would be an amalgam of all of these different nationalities, and rather than try and erase those differences, that we would see that diversity as being our strength and what makes up who we are as America. That's an old-fashioned idea today, only because it's been superseded by some of these other concepts that, as I said, I don't think are very helpful, that really do help us to achieve the unity that we need in order to really continue as a coherent nation. So this isn't a political statement. This is a theological reflection that I'm trying to give. And so the question I want to ask all of us, myself included, how do we look at people who are different than us? How do we view them? People who are racially or ethnically different, who have different customs, different languages, different ways, different backgrounds. How do we view them? Do we view them with prejudicial generalities, or do we view them as individuals that we meet and we come in contact with knowing beforehand, always, that this is a beloved son or daughter of God? Or do we judge a whole nationality or group of people based on the bad behavior of some? I could turn that around and say many have judged all priests based on the bad behavior of a very small percentage. So that works in a variety of different directions, and it can be very problematic and very painful. Our Catholic Catechism has some very clear, distinct words to say about this. Please let me quote two sections of the Catechism. This one is very, I think it's very well put. Everyone should look upon his neighbor without exception as another self. No legislation by itself could do away with the fears, prejudices, and attitudes of pride and selfishness which obstruct the establishment of truly fraternal societies. Such behavior will cease only through the charity that finds in every man a neighbor and a brother. When we see every person as my neighbor, my brother, and my sister, that's the solution. That's the solution. In a few paragraphs down it says, every form of social or cultural discrimination in fundamental personal rights on the grounds of sex, race, color, social conditions, language, or religion must be curbed and eradicated as incompatible with God's design. That is the bottom line of what our church teaches and what we as Catholics seek to strive to achieve. Is it easy? No. Because we're human beings, we're sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. We're also descendants of Cain and Abel, where there is strife between peoples, and we have to work very hard to overcome those instincts of prejudice or discrimination. But this is what it means to be a Catholic, seeking to grow in the virtue of charity and love and unity. It's likely many people here today, many of you, have experienced prejudice, and you know what that's like. And let me just tell you a little bit myself about my own story. Both of my parents were immigrants. My father was from Lebanon. He was an immigrant from Lebanon. My mother, although she was of Lebanese descent, was born in Mexico. And so my parents met in Mexico, they married in Mexico, and they moved to New Haven, Connecticut. Blue blood, New Haven, Connecticut. And my parents experienced a good deal of discrimination, particularly my mother, being of Mexican descent in Connecticut. So after a period of time, she prevailed upon my dad to move us back all to Mexico when I was 11. That's when I experienced discrimination, because when we moved there, the children that in our neighborhood wouldn't play with my sister, my brother, or myself, because we were dreaded gringos. So it was very hard. And when I went to school there, I experienced a good deal of prejudice because I was the only non-Mexican person in my class. And so there was a lot of bullying and a lot of discrimination. And I only say that to tell you that it taught me a good deal without even truly understanding it at that age, but it taught me a lifelong lesson of what it feels like in order to be on the outside or to be considered as different, and someone is considered marginalized because of something you had no control over. Parenthetically, that in no way minimized my love for the Hispanic culture. I love the Hispanic people. I am fully bilingual and bicultural. So that didn't do anything in that's the heart of who I am as a priest. I love the Hispanic community. But that was a very difficult time for me when we lived in Mexico City. So that's why I want to say that. Another area in which we tend to be prejudicial is in the area of politics. We can judge people based on their political viewpoints. How many family gatherings recently have been ruined by political debates and acrimony over these last few years because someone has a different view. Now, it used to be, when I was growing up, you didn't talk about sex, politics, or religion in polite society. Those were things you didn't talk about. Now, today, people want to know right away what are your political views so they can either friend or unfriend you. And that's the culture in which we live. It's become so divisive and so conflictive. And it doesn't help. It doesn't help at all. And particularly when we prejudge people who have different political views than we do. I was reading a book recently by a very thoughtful commentator, and he was referring to a survey that had been done among Democrats and Republicans to see what each thought of the other. And it turns out that most Democrats thought that Republicans were all racist, bigots, and didn't care anything about the poor. And most Republicans thought that all Democrats were left-leaning Marxists who hate America. And yet when they answered those questions themselves, it turns out that only a very small percentage of Democrats felt that way about America. Only a very small percentage of Republicans were really racist and bigots. And most Democrats and most Republicans are not. That was actually news to me, to be honest with you. And so we have to be very careful to say, well, because someone has a different political affiliation than I do, that person is by that nature or ipso facto someone not worthy of my respect or someone who is evil. Now, we can't be Pollyannish about this. We know that in both parties, their platforms contain viewpoints and political stances that go against Catholic teaching. Both parties do. And I'm very eager to critique those things. But that doesn't mean that everybody who is affiliated with a particular party is an enemy. And I think that's what has caused so much of what's one of the things that's caused so much division in our nature, in our country today. So much division in our country, and pitting us one against the other, rather than bringing unity. The same dynamic applies to our church leaders. In my time, I have never seen such acrimony and bitterness and anger among Catholics towards certain bishops and people that disagree with them. And we never talk this way about bishops or people in higher positions in the church, in the hierarchy. And yet it's become commonplace now for us to critique people who have legitimate positions of authority, successors of the apostles, as if they were simply political leaders. Some of them do act that way, I have to admit, but we have to respect the office, and we have to be very careful. I think what helps us in both of these areas, politics and religion, is for us to be very, very moderated and very careful about what sources of news we use, where do we get our news from, and how much we get. We don't need to know about everything that's going on everywhere. That only polarizes us even more, because so much of the news is polemical. And so we have to be very, very judicial about what we take in, how much of it, we may need to know something about what's going on in the world, but just enough, so that we don't find ourselves getting angry, which is what the net result of too much of this polemics can do for us. So where does that leave us? What is the bottom line in all of this? I think about G.K. Chesterton. Someone asked him, Mr. Chesterton, what is the greatest problem in the world today? And his response was, the greatest problem in the world today is me. I am the greatest problem. I think that's how we need to look at it, that each of us has to grow in our ability to see each other as sons and daughters of God, to know that God loves each and every one of us. And I want to give you an advice that was given to me by a wise confessor when I was confessing my sins of judgmentalism. So there you have it. He said, keep your eyes on the cross and remember what Jesus said. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Amen.